Salutations to Swami Vivekananda, the king of monks and the controller of passions, who is absolute being, consciousness, and joy itself. He who is the world teacher and the destroyer of misery. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Good morning, everyone. At least good morning from Santa Barbara. I know it's night over your way. But today is September 11th, which in America for the past 20 years, or 19 actually, has been a very somber day, because since 9/11 of 2001, the date has been forever stained with the memory of the deadly attacks on the World Trade Center in New York that forever shattered America's sense of safety and well-being that other countries have not been able to enjoy. So since 9/11/2001, everything here changed for the worse, very suddenly and seemingly permanently. But it didn't have to be that way. We were all given fair warning by Swamiji in 9/11 at the Parliament of Religions, in which he said prophetically, as it turns out, because he spoke exactly 108 years before our disaster of 9/11/2001, he said, I fervently believe that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell to all fanaticism, to all the persecution of the sword and the pen, and to all uncharitable feelings between persons winding their way to the same goal. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. The world didn't listen to that truth, and we all know what happened. Swamiji rejected sectarianism, bigotry, fanaticism, of which he had already seen plenty in his life. And he told the Parliament, if anyone dreams of the exclusive survival of his own religion and the destruction of others, I pity him from the bottom of my heart and point out to him that upon the banner of every religion will soon be written, in spite of resistance, help and not fight, assimilation and not destruction, harmony and peace and not dissension. This world would have been spared so much misery if only we'd listened to Swamiji's words. So for this, among many other reasons, I'm genuinely honored to be with you today on this anniversary of September 11th, because the hope and the promise of Swamiji lies with us still. It's still up to us. With all my heart, I hope that Swamiji's vision will win the day, because his influence on America has been profound, and in fact has since grown since he first appeared on that stage in Chicago in 1893. So let's go back in time a little bit so we can see what foreshadows that great day. The World's Parliament of Religions was part of the Columbian Exposition, like it was the World's Fair. And the whole point of it was to kind of showcase the fact that the West was so much more superior than everybody else. It was to highlight the achievements of Western civilization, and it was going to be contrasted with other more barbaric countries, other people from other nations that they would be awed about how civilized, how advanced we were. After all, we were going to show electricity for the first time. But of all the various aspects that there were of this Columbian exposition, none were so eagerly anticipated as the Parliament of Religions, because it was for the first time in human history that representatives from all the major world religions were going to be gathered in one place where they could speak of their beliefs without fear. It was an unprecedented event in world history. Now, a number of people who dreamed up this program, who were the planners, were broad-minded, but a lot of them weren't. A lot of them saw the Parliament of Religions as a way of showcasing Christianity, of the way of demonstrating the superiority of Christianity over all the other world religions. One of the reverends said it was preparing the way for the reunion of the world's religions in their true center, Jesus Christ. This broad-minded attitude was that they should, quote, bear brotherly love and brotherly hearts towards those who grope in darkness. In other words, if you're not a Protestant Christian, you're on the wrong road, and they were going to be there to help to show you to the right road. Now, from America's standpoint at the time, the Parliament really was unbelievably progressive, because in 1893, America was an extremely conservative country. In 1893, Indians of both varieties, Native Americans, weren't even allowed to be in the religion section. They were put over at the culture section because their advanced spirituality, which is really quite amazingly beautiful, wasn't considered religion at all. It was part of that barbaric culture. East Indians were believed to be an inferior race. It was assumed without argument that India needed civilizing and Christianizing. It needed colonizing. The Hindus were heathen, and Swamiji said that the Parliament itself was set up to be a heathen show. Well, it didn't work out that way. Although it was meant to showcase Christianity and bring the world to Christ, what happened was that it showcased all the world's religions, and all the world's religions took foothold in the United States from that date on. Even before Swamiji sailed to America, he knew that there was another greater reason for the Parliament. He told Swami Turiyananda, his brother disciple, even before he got on the boat to America, he said, the Parliament of Religions is being organized for this, pointing to his own chest. He said, my mind tells me so. You will see it verified at no distant date. And of course, he was right. No one was prepared for the overwhelming response to Swamiji's message. As Reverend John Barrows, who was expecting the Parliament to bring the world to Christianity, as the Reverend Barrows said, when Mr. Vivekananda got up and addressed the audience as sisters and brothers of America, there arose a peal of applause that lasted for several minutes. Swamiji himself wrote that a deafening applause of 2 minutes followed his words. Just sisters and brothers of America. Mrs. Blodgett, who is an old lady from Los Angeles and who would later be his hostess in Los Angeles, later said, when that young man got up and said, sisters and brothers of America, 7,000 people rose to their feet as a tribute to something they knew not what. Now let's think about this. Sisters and brothers of America. These are 5 very simple words that no one's going to jump to their feet if they hear 5 words, unless it's your house is on fire. Then they'll jump to their feet. But these are 5 simple words that a child can say. Why did it make such a huge impact? Several things. First, Swamiji was speaking the truth. And truth is the most powerful force on earth. Second, when Swamiji said sisters and brothers of America, he literally saw those thousands of people in front of him as his own sisters and brothers. They could feel that vision of unity and that love. And Swamiji's words were not mere words. They conveyed his experience of unity and love. They conveyed his experience of oneness, and that oneness which is the basis of all love. It's the basis of everything. And they responded to Swamiji's love in kind. And there's no magnet as powerful as love. Third, Do please notice that the word sisters comes before brothers. It's not the usual way these words are said. But he went out of his way to highlight women before men. The positioning of the words were not lost on the audience because they roared their approval. Now, Swamiji said this in this country 27 years before women could even vote. But he invoked the power of Shakti. And as Swamiji wrote to his beloved brother disciple Shashi Maharaj, Swami Ramakrishnananda, who would later found the work in Chennai, he said, without Shakti, there is no regeneration for the world. Many of Swamiji's closest disciples and most ardent supporters would be American women. Josephine McLeod, Sarah Bull, Sister Christine, among others. And Sister Nivedita was Western, though she was an American, but her three closest friends were those three American women. But let's think about it from an entirely different angle. 7,000 people isn't all that many people. In the United States, it's like a medium-sized rock and roll concert. But what is deeply significant is that Swamiji's message caught fire, and it's still catching fire, and is still changing lives today. That is how powerful truth is. That is how powerful love is. And that's how powerful Shakti is. So the audience finally stopped applauding. And if you're a speaker and someone's applauding for a long time, it's kind of, you're aware that you're just standing there. If you're clapping your hands for 2 minutes to 4 minutes, you're feeling it in your hands. It's a long time. So when the applause stopped, what did he say that so changed our world? He spoke of the Hindu tradition with intense pride. And he spoke of the respect, the necessity of respect, and the acceptance of other religions in this world. He said, I am proud to belong to a religion that has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal tolerance, but we accept all religions to be true. Not any other religion said that. All of Swamiji's Parliament of Religion speeches spoke of the unity and harmony of religions. And he spoke always in very broad, universal terms. At the first session of the Parliament, he said, the Christian is not to become a Hindu or a Buddhist, nor a Hindu or a Buddhist to become a Christian, but each must assimilate the spirit of the others and yet preserve his own individuality and grow according to his own law of growth. If the Parliament of Religions has shown anything to the world, it is this. It has proved to the world that holiness, purity, and charity are not the exclusive possessions of any church in the world, but every system has produced men and women of the most exalted character. This expansive view of religion was just a breath of fresh air for Americans whose love of freedom runs deep in their veins. And when he spoke to Americans' deepest spiritual aspirations, it made a profound impression. So Swamiji's overriding message at the Parliament was the harmony of religions, that all religions teach the same truths. They'd never heard this before. And that all religions taught the same truths, expressed in different ways, through different cultures, different languages, different traditions. And they were all beautiful. They were all necessary. And together they formed a beautiful garland of the world's religions and the world's spirituality. And without any one of them, we would all be poorer for it. Every one was necessary. The second part was a Hindu corrective to the general idea of what constituted human nature. Because everybody assumed it was a Christian country that we're all born and brought up in sin, and we needed redemption. But rather than being born in sin, he insisted Ye are divinities on earth, sinners. It is a sin to call a person so. It is a standing liable on human nature. You are souls immortal, blessed, free, and eternal. Whoa. And then Swamiji spoke of freedom, freedom from the bonds, freedom from the bonds of imperfection, freedom from the bonds of death and misery. You talk to an American about freedom, it's like feeding meat to a lion. Ah, yes. You talk to Americans about freedom, you get 100% of their attention, because there is nothing that Americans like more than freedom. Runs deep in the veins. So when Swamiji said that freedom was a human birthright, this rang as an absolute truth to an American audience, along with the idea of the perfection already within our souls. That rang as absolute truth. So while preaching religious harmony and the glory of the human soul, Swamiji also stoutly and vehemently defended Hinduism against all that propaganda and the outright lies that were being told about the Hindu tradition. Because we need to remember that when Swamiji appeared at the Parliament in 1893, it was the first time that Americans actually saw a Hindu in the flesh in front of him. And it wasn't what they expected, because missionaries had put out this absurd propaganda about Hindus and Hinduism, that they threw babies to crocodiles, that Hindus threw themselves under the Jagannath carts, that Hindus engaged in depraved rites of human sacrifice and human licentiousness. And all these stories served the purpose of the missionaries, who were able to raise money from it. Because obviously, Christians needed to go to poor, misguided India to save the souls of these heathen, to save them from themselves. But instead of seeing a crazed idolater or a crystal ball reading yogi fortune teller, Americans heard at the Parliament an eloquent description of Hinduism's glory, as well as humanity's highest aspirations. Amazing. He said, I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I am proud to tell you we have gathered in our bosom the purest remnants of the Israelites, the Jews, who came to southern India and took refuge with us in the very year in which their holy temple was shattered to pieces by the Roman tyranny, and that was 70 AD. I am proud to belong to the religion which has gathered and is still fostering the remnants of the grand Zoroastrian religion. Now, who wouldn't want to belong to such a religion? Who wouldn't be proud to belong to such a grand religion? And then, instead of bringing up the Bible, Swamiji quotes the Bhagavad Gita, the great Hindu scripture, in which Sri Krishna says, whosoever comes to me through whatever form, I reach them. All are struggling through paths which in the end lead to me, to the divine. Americans took to Swamiji's message like ducks take to water. It was exactly what we needed to hear at exactly the right time. Swamiji said to Swami Triyananda, the Parliament of Religions is being organized for this. How right he was, how prophetic he was. Because America and the world were never the same, thank God. As you know, after the Parliament, Swamiji toured America, speaking all the time, speaking incessantly, sometimes speaking 3 times a day. The pace that he kept in America was literally lethal. His letters from America spoke of his illness, his exhaustion. He writes of a schedule that would kill anybody else. And he finally speaks of his shattered health, from which he would never recover. And he knew his time on earth was short. So why did he spend nearly 4 years of his very brief 39 years. Why did he spend 4 precious years working in America, nearly to death? He had so much waiting for him to do in India. He had so much that he needed to do in India. He needed to establish the Ramakrishna mission, the Mutt. He needed to organize the various monasteries, all the social service activities. He needed to inaugurate the women's work, which was extremely important to him. He wanted to start the Vedic college. He had so much to do, and yet he worked himself nearly to the point of death in the West. Why? There had to be a really good reason for it. And his answer to our question comes in a letter. He said the West is the field of work if one wants to benefit humanity and not just one's particular country. Because as much as Swamiji loved India, and he loved India passionately, he loved humanity more. He boldly declared, I have a message to the West as Buddha had a message to the East. That's bold. Swamiji's particular message to the West was, again, harmony of religions, unity of existence, the inherent divinity of the soul. He came to tell us we were already perfect, already free, already eternal. But Swamiji was a world prophet. He knew that the world would soon become what we call today a global village. Today, what affects one part of the earth profoundly affects the entire planet. Swamiji saw that in years to come, the world would contract through technology and communication. He foresaw how the West, and America in particular, would come to dominate the world for good and for bad. So whatever ideas the West took up, these same ideas would infiltrate the rest of the world. The values of the West today could become the values of the East tomorrow. That's why his work in the West was so important. It was necessary to get to the seed. Now, Swamiji's work in America wasn't easy. Cowboys in Texas shot at him with their guns. People pulled at his turban, and someone even put poison in his coffee. The famous American philosopher Robert Ingersoll told Swamiji that if he'd come to America 40 years early, he would have been hung. But Swamiji endured it all because he knew that America had to be changed from within. The seeds of Hindu spirituality had to be planted so that the message of Vedanta, which has been the message of the Hindu sages for thousands of years, had to take root here. Despite all America's shortcomings, and they are legion, Swamiji felt that America had particularly fertile soil for Vedanta because of its democratic traditions and its emphasis on the personal dignity of the individual. Swamiji wrote his beloved disciple Alasinga about America. He said, here is a grand field. I am the servant of the Lord, and where on earth is there a better field than here for propagating all high ideas? Here, where man feels for man, and women are goddesses. Goddesses? I don't know. But Swamiji was deeply appreciative of American women, and particularly the high caliber of American women's education. And he dearly wished the same for Indian women. He noticed and he wrote extensively about how American women were in the forefront of all reform movements in this country. And it was women who were the ones who showed the most serious interest in his work, took it to heart, and they actually helped him with his work, not only in America, but in India as well. Swamiji was a visionary in any number of areas. Notably, and especially for me very personally, Swamiji broke new ground by ordaining into sannyas not only Westerners, but Western women. Now, today, this may appear to be a commonplace occurrence, but at the time, it was nothing less than utterly revolutionary. Vivekananda insisted that women were as qualified for sannyasa and brahmagyana, equally as qualified as men. Now, this was absolutely revolutionary. At the time, giving sannyasa to Westerners was deeply shocking, but to Western women, it was literally unthinkable. Alasinga wrote him about it, and Swamiji said, "Oh, yes. Oh, yes." There's no doubt that it was Swamiji's insistence in the 1890s that created the women's monastic organizations we have today. It's worth noting that Sri Sarada Mutt is today India's largest and most prominent women's monastic organization. I have to tell you, we in the West do not belong to Sri Sarada Mutt. We are the only women's outposts of the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission, as we are the nuns in the Vedanta Society associated with the Ramakrishna Mutt and Mission, because we were actually founded. Our first nuns had their monastic vows in 1949, which was 7 years before the founding of Sri Sarada Mutt. So we're sort of an anomaly in the world. We take our vows to the Ramakrishna order. Another innovation which we now take for granted was the Swamiji's founding of an organization and the founding of the Vedana societies. And the first one was in New York in 1894, and later the Ramakrishna Mission in 1897. Now, sannyasins as a habit do not organize. Our sannyasa vows assert our freedom, and we're a very independent bunch of people. You have to be to leave your family. You've got to be very independent. And Swamiji himself fought the idea of organization. He didn't like the idea. In America, they overheard him walking on the floor above him, speaking to himself loudly, saying, "To organize or not to organize. If I organize, the spirit will diminish. If I do not organize, the message will not spread." In the end, he chose to organize. And since that time, other Hindu organizations other Hindu teachers have formed organizations, and they've been extremely successful. But Swamiji was the first, and he created the pattern that others would emulate, that others would follow. Swamiji himself personally founded the first Vedanta Society in New York in 1894 and chose the name Vedanta Society. He founded the next one in San Francisco in 1900, and it was his brother disciple, Swami Trigunatitananda, who built the first Hindu temple in this country in San Francisco in 1906. Now, Swamiji left students of Vedanta throughout America, and these eager students kept wanting to study Vedanta, wanting to study these elevating ideas. So they themselves formed Vedanta societies. And why Vedanta? Swamiji did not want any sectarian ideas creeping in. He wanted only the most universal philosophy, which applied to all people in all countries of all religions. Because Swamiji believed the American work to be so vital, he asked 4 of his brother disciples to join him in the work: Swamis Abhedananda, Saradananda, Turiyananda, and Trigunatitananda. Swamiji wanted America to be permeated with Vedanta ideas in order to benefit this country, which would then benefit the world as a whole. Swamiji dramatically and permanently changed America from within, and he permanently changed the West. Yet, today, very few people know the name Swami Vivekananda, nor have they even heard the word Vedanta. They call us the Vedanta Society, the Vedanta. They have no idea about the word Vedanta. And that wouldn't bother Swamiji at all. In fact, that's exactly what he wanted. He wrote to his beloved brother disciple, Shashi Maharaj. He said, "I want to be a voice without a form. The desire for name and fame has not yet crept into my heart, and I dare say it never will. I am an instrument, and he is the operator. Through this instrument, he is arousing the religious instinct in thousands of hearts in this far-off country. Remember, Swamiji kept saying, it is his will. I am a voice without a form. The Vedanta philosophy here is not well known, and Vedanta societies here are very small. We're not well known. Again, that would not bother Swamiji. It doesn't bother us, those who live here, work here, given our lives here. We've taken our spiritual nourishment here. So what? Because our impact has been great. As the American historian Carl Jackson wrote, speaking about the Vedana societies, he said, few other religious bodies of such Lilliputian size have equaled the movement's impact or historical significance. That's us. The Ramakrishna Mission, Vedana societies. Cultural and historical significance. And I could truthfully say Swami Vivekananda may be the most significant person to have changed the course of American spiritual and cultural history, while simultaneously being the least known and appreciated. And again, Swamiji could care less. He wanted to be a voice without a form. It doesn't really matter, because Swamiji's ideas, which are the foundation of the Vedana societies, have been instrumental in changing the face of American religion, culture, and society. Religion scholar Wade Clark Roof wrote that the ideas from the Hindu tradition, and these are the ideas that came from Swami Vivekananda, he said these ideas are now rather widely diffused in American culture as a whole and included within the churches, synagogues, and temples. So if you go to a church, a Jewish synagogue, or some temple, you're quite likely to hear the ideas that Swami Vivekananda taught at the Parliament of Religions that are now diffused through American culture. Thank you, Swamiji. Because of what Swamiji said at the Parliament and because of all his lectures, which were given throughout this country, and significantly because the impact of his writings, the basic character of American spirituality was changed slowly and inexorably. And America never really noticed how much it was changing. One of Swamiji's most important contributions to world thought were his talks on the yogas. These were transcribed and later turned into books. Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga. These made a huge contribution to the Western understanding of the Hindu tradition. These books found their ways into libraries and to personal bookshelves. Remember, long before the internet, long before television, people actually read. Reading was a big deal. Publication of a new book was a big deal. People read, and these books made a huge impact. Swamiji's first publication, Raja Yoga, made a tremendous impact. Professor Elizabeth McKellis, who is a professor at Cambridge University, England, said that in Raja Yoga, this was the first fully fledged formulation of modern yoga to be presented to the Western world, the very first. Raja Yoga had a tremendous impact in the West. The great psychologist William James quoted from Raja Yoga, quoted from Swamiji extensively in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, which has been a touchstone of religion and psychology since 1902. Continually, that book has been in use. Raja Yoga also profoundly affected Leo Tolstoy in Russia. In fact, it was Raja Yoga that had tremendous impact on the Beatles. I'm not kidding. George Harrison, one of the Beatles, who were arguably the most famous and influential stars of the 20th century. Now, the Beatles were deeply impacted because George Harrison was given the book Raja Yoga by Ravi Shankar. Yes. So he got this book and he was so impressed by what Swami Vivekananda said. George Harrison of the Beatles said, "By having money, we found that money wasn't the answer." Swami Vivekananda said, and here he's quoting Raja Yoga. Harrison quotes Raja Yoga saying, "If there is a God, we must see him. If there is a soul, we must perceive it. Otherwise, it is better not to believe. It is better to be an outspoken atheist than a hypocrite." And George Harrison said, "At last, I found someone who made sense, and I wanted to go deeper into it." As he did, he became a lifelong Hindu. From that day forward, he took refuge in the Hindu tradition and became a lifelong devotee of Krishna and died with those rites. Now, today in America, only 0.5% say that they follow the Hindu religion. The vast majority of Americans are Christian, or they're Jewish, or they have no religious affiliation whatsoever. Yet Americans now hold beliefs that are part of the Hindu tradition. Americans just don't realize it. The change is so surprising and so dramatic that in 2009, Newsweek, which is a national news magazine, the cover article was entitled, "We are all Hindus now." Oh boy, did they get a reaction from that. Why did they say this? Because somehow we all had acquired beliefs from the Hindu tradition, and no one knew from where. For example, over 70% of Americans believe that, quote, "many religions can lead to eternal life." In other words, all religions are true. Swamiji's teachings on the unity of religions definitely has had its effect, because there is nothing in Christianity or Judaism or any other religion that suggests that other religions are equally valid as their own. Another amazing point: neither Christians nor Jews believe in reincarnation. Doesn't exist. You die, you go to heaven, or you go to hell. That's it. Yet today, approximately 1/4 of the American population believe in reincarnation. How did that happen? Let me give you my own example. Well, maybe last month, the month before, I was out working in the garden and our gardener came in. Now, our gardener is Mexican. He is a devout Catholic. He had all 3 children raised in the Catholic faith with the catechism, the baptism, all of it. He's a very devout Catholic. And he said to me, "I don't want to be reborn." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I don't want to be reborn. There is so much suffering in this world." And I said, "Enrique, you're Catholic?" And he said, "I don't want to be reborn." And I said, well, I went with it. I said, if you have desire, you will be reborn, because then you accrue more karma and more results of your karma. And so we had this long discussion with this man who's a devout Catholic and doesn't want to be reborn. So when a devout Catholic tells you that he doesn't want to be reborn, Swamiji's impact is being felt in the country. The concept of reincarnation is extremely common now in movies, in television shows, in books. We have to thank Swami Vivekananda for this. Another point: the concept of karma is extremely widespread and popular, known as what comes around goes around. The concept is so widespread that no one ever translates karma. Even children will tell you that this is bad karma. Even little toddlers will talk to you about your karma. It's so widespread, it appears in television shows, movies, newspapers, everywhere. Everywhere. Now, another example. I went to a big store here called Costco. It's this huge department store. It's the size of a big football field, huge, items everywhere. And I went to talk to the floor manager because I had got the previous week a big gallon of detergent, but when I got home, I noticed they hadn't charged me for it. So I spoke to the floor manager and said, no, look, I got this last week, but you somehow missed it in my shopping cart, and we would like to pay for it now. And he said, oh, no, you can't pay for it now, but thank you for telling me. I will change our inventory. Now, the floor manager was a young Mexican man in his 20s, about my height, short. He was either a devout Catholic or, just as likely, an conservative evangelical Christian. He knew nothing about Hinduism. So I said, but we have it and we would really like to pay for it. And he came up to me and he touched me on the shoulder and said, that's okay. It's your good karma. And I just smiled to myself and thought, oh, Swamiji, what you have done to this country, what you have done to this country to have a Mexican floor manager in Costco tell me about my good karma. I know Swamiji's work is continuing to grow and grow. Yet, nobody knows his name. And then again, there's yoga. Yoga is extremely popular and widespread in every corner, every nook and cranny of this country. Today, 55 million Americans practice yoga. That's like 18, almost 20% of the population. Who brought yoga to this country? Well, if you go to Google, say, who brought yoga to America? It will tell you Swami Vivekananda. Thank you, Google. Yet almost no one knows the name Swami Vivekananda, and certainly not the name Vedanta. So then how did all of this happen? Swamiji's ideas have permeated American thought through his writings and through those who have been influenced by those writings and by the Vedana societies and by the people that these Vedana societies influenced. Some of the most prominent thinkers in this country, some of those prominent intellectuals, became influenced through the Vedana societies, and they, in their turn, influenced the society around them. For example, Joseph Campbell, a leading intellectual, a very, very popular writer, had a very, very popular television program on myth and culture. He was the president of the New York Vedana Society, and he helped translate the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He helped translate the Upanishads. Now, George Lucas, who is the creator of Star Wars, was deeply influenced by Joseph Campbell. He read everything that Joseph Campbell wrote, and he followed Joseph Campbell around like a puppy follows its owner. George Lucas based the ideal of the Jedi warrior of Star Wars upon the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, that the Jedi must overcome desire and anger, kama krodha. The same that Sri Krishna warns us about in the Bhagavad Gita. And the source of the Jedi's strength comes from the Force, which is defined as the very ground of all being. That kind of sounds like Brahman to me. Or maybe the Force is Shakti, but whatever it is, sure isn't Christian, sure isn't Jewish. There are so many other examples about Swamiji's impact at the Parliament, and his continuing influence has transformed this country quietly and permanently. In Los Angeles, we have a Vedana society, and Christopher Isherwood began to attend it. Christopher Isherwood was considered by Somerset Maugham to be the greatest prose writer of the 20th century. When Swami Prabhavananda was doing his translations of the Hindu classics, the Bhagavad Gita, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Shankara's Vivekachudamani, who did he turn to for help in that? Christopher Isherwood. And today they created books that are still being used and being sold in the millions. I asked a person who came to the Vedanta temple here, I said, "Oh, how did you find out about Vedanta?" And they said, "Well, I took a city bus and someone had left this book on the bus called the Bhagavad Gita. And I read it. It was just amazing. And I wanted to find out more about it. And it said it was at the Vedanta. And so I came up here to find out more about it." The writings. Millions and millions of those books have been sold, used in college classrooms, have been read widely throughout the country. These ideas that are slowly permeating American society. In 1896, Swamiji said, "I have just begun my work." Now that phrase is what we need to keep in mind when we think of his continuing influence in the West and how that continues to influence the world as a whole. Because 6 years after he said these words, Swamiji just threw his body aside. How could his work go on without him? And Swamiji gave the hint when he said, "In America, I have only raised 1 or 2 waves. A tidal wave must be raised. Society must be turned upside down. The world must be given a new civilization. The world will understand what that power is and why I have come. The world will understand." He didn't give us a time frame as to when it would understand. We don't know, but we know that the world is changing. It seems to be going to the worse, and then we see how much it's going to the better because these ideas are permeating societies throughout the world. I was just asked for permission to for a translation of Vedanta, a simple introduction, into Bulgarian. Who would have thought? In so many ways, Swamiji's message is getting out through so many varied sources. Since the Parliament, Swamiji's voice continues to ring throughout America and throughout the rest of the world. But it is disguised in hundreds of different ways. It doesn't say Swami Vivekananda, but there are his teachings, there are his very words. We have a group in this country, and maybe you have it in India. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a very, very noble organization which is dedicated to help alcoholics and addicts of all varieties, drug addicts, alcoholics, to become sober. And they do this by learning to hand things over to a higher power. They didn't want to give it a name, but just a higher power. So I wrote this book called Vedanta, A Simple Introduction. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a book called The Big Book. This book that's given to people trying to recover from alcoholism. And this big book every day has teachings in it about these noble teachings to elevate one's thought, to give oneself over to a higher power. So I was just minding my own business, and I get this random email out of nowhere where this woman says, "If you're going to quote the Alcoholics Anonymous big book, you should at least quote your source and say that it's coming from the big book." And I went, "What?" So I wrote her back and said, "I have never read the big book. I do not belong to Alcoholics Anonymous, though I'm a great supporter of their organization, and a number of our devotees have been very much helped. A number of my personal friends from childhood have been greatly helped, and it has saved their lives. But no, I've never read the big book. She writes me back and said, there's at least 10 different places where you have quoted the big book. And I wrote back saying, excuse me, I've never quoted anybody apart from Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sarada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda. That's who I quote. And then she ordered 10 copies of Vedanta, A Simple Introduction, and she thanked me. I became quite curious about this. How could this woman have thought this? So I began doing a little digging, and I discovered that the founder, or one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, the one who wrote the big book, was a friend of Gerald Hurd. Gerald Hurd was a very devoted disciple of Swami Prabhavananda, and it was Gerald Hurd's property that later was given to the Vedana Society, which became the Ramakrishna Order's Trabuco's, the Ramakrishna Monastery in Trabuco Canyon in Orange County, which is now our biggest center in Southern California. He gave that property. Well, it turns out that Gerald Hurd was friends with this person who was a founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this person had stayed with Gerald Hurd, and Gerald Hurd had given him books on Vedanta. And Gerald Hurd's Vedanta books had incorporated themselves into the mind of this founder of AA, who then put these ideas into the big book that is being used today since the 1940s for Alcoholics Anonymous, and has given millions and millions of people hope to live their lives free, in freedom and in strength. Thank you, Swami Vivekananda. Since the Parliament, Swamiji's voice continues to ring throughout America, throughout the rest of the world, but it is disguised in hundreds of different ways. The voice continues, but it speaks through different mouths, and it shows up in very unexpected places. Who would have thought Alcoholics Anonymous? But the power that brought that voice here is still here. And that voice that rang out in 1893 continues to inspire us, and it transforms us. It transforms nations. It transforms the world. It transforms society and culture. We don't know when the full effect will take, but we can only be grateful for that blessing that continues to inspire us and guide us. I deeply thank you for this opportunity to remember these ideas on September 11th, 2020. Thank you. Jai Thakur, Jai Ma, Jai Swamiji.
Thank you very much, Mataji, for the enlightening as well as informative talk. And we talked about the impact of Swamiji ideas on Western world, and then we thought how the Hindus' ideas like karma have penetrated all across the world, and people use them in day-to-day life. And eight, we practice it. We hardly know like who has introduced it to this, and it went. So yeah, so it was very good. Thank you so much. So the question. Now the floor is open for the question. I request audience to give a section of the YouTube channel. Okay. So yeah, meanwhile I have a question. So when we say Chicago address, we think about Swamiji's speech. So are there any other important developments that we usually don't talk about in the Chicago religion made?
Well, I think it was important that Swamiji gave several different talks. It wasn't just on September 11th. His concluding address was very powerful. And any time that they wanted to keep the audience there, they would hold Swamiji till the end to make sure the people stayed, because that was the person they wanted to see. Swamiji was so powerful, so inspiring, so energizing. They wanted to hear him. So he kept putting forth these ideas. Swamiji himself was deeply impressed by going around the Parliament, by seeing all the different cultures and religions that were there. by seeing all the different things that were happening scientifically in this country, because they put it, all things of science were out on display. And he had a very scientific mind. So he was deeply impressed by that. And his own mental wheels started turning about how this could be used to bring to India, to elevate the status of the poor, and to bring more education to the masses. So there's never a one-way street when it comes to a person visiting someplace new. Ideas are shared on both sides. By that time, also, he had spent a great deal of time in this country with the Hale family in Chicago. And he'd also been to Annisquam, where he had, when he arrived in this country, he was the guest of a woman where his first talk was given in a church, a Unitarian church of all places, in Annisquam, Massachusetts. The idea of a Hindu speaking at a Christian church in 1893 was so preposterous that the Harvard professor who later asked him to speak, his wife was in attendance. So the Harvard professor's wife said that the idea of a Hindu monk coming to speak in a Christian church, she said, was so unthinkable that she went into a corner and laughed until she cried, because the idea was so preposterous that a Hindu monk would speak in a Christian church. But he was invited and welcomed and asked again. And this happened wherever he went. He was asked to speak in churches, in Jewish synagogues, in everywhere he get. On the other hand, because his popularity was growing, missionaries fought against him. They did everything they could to try to defame him. But this only made the work grow stronger. To study what he did in America and the reactions is a fascinating study. I highly recommend to anyone who is interested the volumes of Marie Louise Burke, Sister Gargi, who unearthed new information, and to see how Swamiji overcomes these obstacles and creates these new ideas is deeply inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Mata. Thank you. Yeah. So on similar line, we have another question. So yes. You mentioned like in the West, people had conviction like, so we are a born sinner and we have to get rid of this. And Swamiji introduced like, you are immortal soul. And yes, so this was something new, how people have accepted it. And if they were, and you also mentioned like Americans are hungry for freedom. So when we say freedom, so what exactly it means?
Good point. I also have to say that Swamiji's appearance was foreshadowed by the American transcendentalists. There were a number of people, mostly located around the Boston area, who had studied translations of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Thoreau, Emerson, these people. And they wrote these ideas in some of their essays and their poetry. So some of these ideas from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita were beginning to infiltrate, but they were only to a very, very, very small group of people. And it wasn't until Swami Vivekananda came that he was able to really set things to a huge, huge group of people through not only his appearance at the Parliament, but the fact that he appeared in so many places so often in his writings, that you can see how can anybody, he would travel sometimes 12 hours a day by train and then give talks wherever he went. And he was so ill, so exhausted, but he pushed himself because he knew these ideas had to get through, had to get forward, had to break into the granite of these Calvinist ideas that were throughout American society, these ideas of the sin, of damnation, of ours being the only religion. Freedom was so important for Americans because they understood freedom to be the ability to do what you want. Now, of course, freedom is a double-edged sword. Do we mean freedom from desire? Or do we mean freedom to do what I want to do, when I want to do it? And Americans sort of like all of it. They like the idea. Americans don't want to wear masks, a lot of them, because they say, I'm free. I shouldn't have to wear a mask. Well, you live in a society where other people want to be free not to die, not to get sick from your disease. So freedom has to take into account responsibility. And America is a very young country and has yet to learn about responsibility. Americans love freedom, they not so much on responsibility, not so much about thinking of Americans love individuality. They don't like so much the responsibility of sharing with another individual. There's more than one individual on the planet. We're a billion individuals. How to accommodate one's personal freedom with the personal freedom of others. That's always been a double-edged sword. But real freedom is the freedom to be free from desire, freedom from being overtaken by kama krodha, by lust, anger, desire. That's freedom. Freedom not to react. Swamiji showed the freedom not to react. When cowboys shot at him, he didn't react. That got their tremendous respect. Oh, that boy's the real thing. They shot at him, he didn't flinch. People put poison in his coffee. Sri Ramakrishna took his hand and moved it. Swamiji always knew. Swamiji felt the presence. He felt the presence of Sri Ramakrishna the entire time he was here. Not once did he feel like he was alone. He knew that he was an instrument of a greater power. He was the power of Sri Ramakrishna. And that allowed him to be able to withstand any sort of obstacle, any sort of threat. And when that person pulled on his turban, he just turned around and said, "Why are you doing that?" And the person just blurted out, "Well, you're different." And Swamiji said, "Yes." And the man was humiliated and went away. To be able to have that freedom of self-control, that is real freedom. That is what we have to learn in America. That's what the world needs to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mataji. Another question is, so we have a concept of consciousness, Shakti, right? So, I mean, this is a little off the topic, but we would like to know how world look at this when we say consciousness, universal consciousness. So how the world outside look at these concepts?
Well, I think even in universities now, they're having entire courses called consciousness studies. The topic of consciousness is extremely popular now and is extremely important. There's a lot of controversy about what constitutes consciousness because many scientists will say consciousness is the result of firing neurons in the brain. Other scientists will say no, it's located outside the body, but that is a very, very small group of scientists who have the courage to say that. Most of them will say it's the firing of the neurons. But there are many people who are, it's a great topic and it's being discussed widely. It wasn't even 10 years ago that when you talked about consciousness, you meant I am conscious of this. I'm conscious of that. The idea of consciousness itself, pure consciousness, is now a subject of great interest and study. And that in itself is a great step forward. And I think, of course, we can thank Swami Vivekananda for that and his instruments through Hindu thought that have been coming to this country. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. So, yeah, so this could be last question. Yes. So, so Swamiji, all through his work, Swamiji talks about unselfishness is God.
Yes.
And he also says like we have to be ideal, at the same time we have to be practical, right? So in this our day-to-day life, so do you have any suggestions to practice this? Because we see around a lot of things happens and sometimes this distracts us. So how we can take charge of these things?
That's a very good question. Swamiji said unselfishness is God. And that's so true. On the other hand, one has to practice common sense. It is unselfishness to go in and serve people with COVID. On the other hand, you have to be practical. Are you equipped to serve them? Do you have the means to serve them? Are you qualified to serve them? Or are you just getting in the way? We always have to examine our motives in every possible instance. Am I doing this because I want to feel better about myself? Am I doing this for a little glory, a little name and fame? Do I have something to offer? Am I simply being foolish and putting myself and other people at risk? We need to always, Swami Asheshananda, the great disciple of Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi in Portland, said, use your buddhi. We have to really think about, am I doing the appropriate thing? Time, place, circumstance, as Sri Sarada Devi would say. Is what I'm doing appropriate? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Am I serving the greater good? Or am I actually getting in the way? Am I causing more of a problem? Sometimes in our enthusiasm, we'll go forward and then it'll be, no, it was actually the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong circumstance, and we should not have done it. So we really have to be a lot more conscious of our own motives, really keep ourselves and the ego in check. The ego is always the source of all of our problems. Keep the ego in check and say, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for the appropriate reason? Am I doing it for the appropriate motive? If so, what are my goals? What do I hope for? And then pray with all of our might to get ourselves out of the way. If we can get ourselves and the ego out of the way, then we can truly give service. Then we can do and say the right thing, and then we don't get in the way. Otherwise, we can create more of a problem. That would be my answer to that.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Thanks for answering all the questions, and I hope this discussion will be beneficial for all the participants. I once again thank on behalf of everyone for joining and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
It has been my great pleasure. My Thakur Ma and Swamiji bless you all. That is my prayer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.